may be best put to those who are experienced in the matter. Their urbanity and social culture have long been conspicuous by their absence. There is no truth, then, in such pretexts. It can be urged with more justice that as, when you snarl at a dog, he snarls in return, and when you pet him, he fawns, so it lies in the nature of men to return hostility by hostility, and to be embittered and irritated at any signs of depreciatory treatment or hatred, and, as Cicero says, there is something so penetrating in the shaft of envy that even men of wisdom and worth find its wound a painful one, and nowhere in the world, except, perhaps, in a few religious sects, is an insult or a blow taken with equanimity. And yet a natural view of either would in no case demand anything more than a requital proportionate to the offense, and would never go to the length of assigning death as the proper penalty for anyone who accuses another of lying or stupidity or cowardice. The old German theory of blood for a blow is a revolting superstition of the age of chivalry. And in any case the return or requital of an insult is dictated by anger, and not by any such obligation of honor and duty as the advocates of chivalry seek to attach to it. The fact is that, the greater the truth, the greater the slander, and it is clear that the slightest hint of some real delinquency will give much greater offense than a most terrible accusation which is perfectly baseless, so that a man who is quite sure that he has done nothing to deserve a reproach may treat it with contempt, and will be safe in doing so. The theory of honor demands that he shall show a susceptibility which he does not possess, and take vengeance for insults which he cannot feel. A man must himself have but a poor opinion of his own worth who hastens to prevent the utterance of an unfavorable opinion by giving his enemy a black eye. True appreciation of his own value will make a man really indifferent to insult, but if he cannot help resenting it, a little shrewdness and culture will enable him to save appearances and dissemble his anger. If he could only get rid of this superstition about honor, the idea, I mean, that it disappears when you are insulted, and can be restored by returning the insult, if we could only stop people from thinking that wrong, brutality and insolence can be legalized by expressing readiness to give satisfaction, that is, to fight in defense of it, we should all soon come to the general opinion that insult and depreciation are like a battle in which the loser wins, and that, as Vincenzo Monti says, abuse resembles a church procession, because it always returns to the point from which it set out. If we could only get people to look upon insult in this light, we should no longer have to say something rude in order to prove that we are in the right. Now, unfortunately, if we want to take a serious view of any question, we have first of all to consider whether it will not give offense in some way or other to the dullard, who generally shows alarm and resentment at the merest sign of intelligence, and it may easily happen that the head which contains the intelligent view has to be pitted against the noodle which is empty of everything but narrowness and stupidity. If all this were done away with, intellectual superiority could take the leading place in society, which is its due a place now occupied, though people do not like to confess it, by excellence of physique, mere fighting pluck, in fact, and the natural effect of such a change would be that the best kind of people would have one reason the less for withdrawing from society. This would pave the way for the introduction of real courtesy and genuinely good society, such as undoubtedly existed in Athens, Corinth, and Rome. If anyone wants to see a good example of what I mean, I should like him to read Xenophon's Banquet. The last argument in defense of knightly honor no doubt is, that, but for its existence, the world awful thought would be a regular bear garden. To which I may briefly reply that 999 people out of 1,000 who do not recognize the code, have often given and received a blow without any fatal consequences, whereas amongst the adherents of the code a blow usually means death to one of the parties. But let me examine this argument more closely. I have often tried to find some tenable, or at any rate, plausible basis other than a merely conventional one, some positive reasons, that is to say, for the rooted conviction which a portion of mankind entertains, that a blow is a very dreadful thing, but I have looked for it in vain, either in the animal or in the rational side of human nature. A blow is, and always will be, a trivial physical injury which one man can do to another, proving, thereby, nothing more than his superiority in strength or skill, or that his enemy was off his guard. Analysis will carry us no further. The same knight who regards a blow from the human hand as the greatest of evils, if he gets a 10 times harder blow from his horse, will give you the assurance, as he limps away in suppressed pain, that it is a matter of no consequence whatever. So I have come to think that it is the human hand which is at the bottom of the mischief. And yet in a battle the knight may get cuts and thrusts from the same hand, and still assure you that his wounds are not worth mentioning. Now, I hear that a blow from the flat of a sword is not by any means so bad as a blow from a stick, and that, a short time ago, cadets were liable to be punished by the one but not the other, and that the very greatest honor of all is the accolade. This is all the psychological or moral basis that I can find, and so there is nothing left me but to pronounce the whole thing an antiquated superstition that has taken deep root, and one more of the many examples which show the force of tradition. My view is confirmed by the well-known fact that in China a beating with a bamboo is a very frequent punishment for the common people, and even for officials of every class, which shows that human nature, even in a highly civilized state, does not run in the same groove here and in China. On the contrary, an unprejudiced view of human nature shows that it is just as natural for a man to beat as it is for savage animals to bite and rend in pieces, or for horned beasts to butt or push. Man may be said to be the animal that beats. Hence it is revolting to our sense of the fitness of things to hear, as we sometimes do, that one man bitten another. On the other hand, it is a natural and everyday occurrence for him to get blows or give them. It is intelligible enough that, as we become educated, we are glad to dispense blows by a system of mutual restraint. But it is a cruel thing to compel a nation or a single class to regard a blow as an awful misfortune which must have death and murder for its consequences. There are too many genuine evils in the world to allow of our increasing them by imaginary misfortunes, which brings real ones in their train, and yet this is the precise effect of the superstition, which thus proves itself at once stupid and malign. It does not seem to me wise of governments and legislative bodies to promote any such folly by attempting to do away with flogging as a punishment in civil or military life. Their idea is that they are acting in the interests of humanity, but, in point of fact, they are doing just the opposite, for the abolition of flogging will serve only to strengthen this inhuman and abominable superstition, to which so many sacrifices have already been made. For all offenses, except the worst, a beating is the obvious, and therefore the natural penalty, and a man who will not listen to reason will yield to blows. It seems to me right and proper to administer corporal punishment to the man who possesses nothing and therefore cannot be fined, or cannot be put in prison because his master's interests would suffer by the loss of his service. There are really no arguments against it, only mere talk about the dignity of man, talk which proceeds, not from any clear notions on the but from the pernicious superstition I have been describing. That it is a superstition which lies at the bottom of the whole business is proved by an almost laughable example. Not long ago, in the military discipline of many countries, the cat was replaced by the stick. In either case the object was to produce physical pain, but the latter method involved no disgrace, and was not derogatory to honor. By promoting this superstition, the state is playing into the hands of the principle of knightly honor, and therefore of the duel, while at the same time it is trying, or at any rate it pretends it is trying, to abolish the duel by legislative enactment. As a natural consequence we find that this fragment of the theory that might is right, which has come down to us from the most savage days of the Middle Age, has still in this 19th century a good deal of life left in it, more shame to us. It is high time for the principle to be driven out bag and baggage. Nowadays no one is allowed to set dogs or cocks to fight each other, at any rate, in England it is a penal offence, but men are plunged into deadly strife, against their will, by the operation of this ridiculous, superstitious, and absurd principle, which imposes upon us the obligation, as its narrow-minded supporters and advocates declare, of fighting with one another like gladiators, for any little trifle. Let me recommend our purists to adopt the expression baiting instead of duel, which probably comes to us, not from the Latin duellum, but from the Spanish duello, meaning suffering, nuisance, annoyance. In any case, we may well laugh at the pedantic excess to which this foolish system has been carried. It is really revolting that this principle, with its absurd code, can form a power within the state imperium in imperio, a power too easily put in motion, which, recognizing no right but might, tyrannizes over the classes which come within its range, by keeping up a sort of inquisition, before which anyone may be hailed on the most flimsy pretext, and there and then be tried on an issue of life and death between himself and his opponent. This is the lurking place from which every rascal, if he only belongs to the classes in question, may menace and even exterminate the noblest and best of men, who, as such, must of course be an object of hatred to him. Our system of justice and police protection has made it impossible in these days for any scoundrel in the street to attack us with your money or your life. An end should be put to the burden which weighs upon the higher classes, the burden, I mean, of having to be ready every moment to expose life and limb to the mercy of anyone who takes it into his rascally head to be coarse, rude, foolish, or malicious. It is perfectly atrocious that a pair of silly, passionate boys should be wounded, maimed, or even killed, simply because they have had a few words. The strength of this tyrannical power within the state, and the force of the superstition, may be measured by the fact that people who are prevented from restoring their knightly honor by the superior or inferior rank of their aggressor, or anything else that puts the persons on a different level, often come to a tragic comic end by committing suicide in sheer despair. You may generally know a thing to be false and ridiculous by finding that, if it is carried to its logical conclusion, it results in a contradiction, and here, too, we have a very glaring absurdity. For an officer is forbidden to take part in a duel, but if he is challenged and declines to come out, he is punished by being dismissed the service. As I am on the matter, let me be more frank still. The important distinction, which is often insisted upon, between killing your enemy in a fair fight with equal weapons, and lying in ambush for him, is entirely a corollary of the fact that the power within the state, of which I have spoken, recognizes no other right than might, that is, the right of the stronger, and appeals to a judgment of God as the basis of the whole code. For to kill a man in a fair fight, is to prove that you are superior to him in strength or skill, and to justify the deed, you must assume that the right of the stronger is really a right. But the truth is that, if my opponent is unable to defend himself, it gives me the possibility, but not by any means the right, of killing him. The right, the moral justification, must depend entirely upon the motives which I have for taking his life. Even supposing that I have sufficient motive for taking a man's life, there is no reason why I should make his death depend upon whether I can shoot or fence better than he. In such a case, it is immaterial in what way I kill him, whether I attack him from the front or the rear. From a moral point of view, the right of the stronger is no more convincing than the right of the more skillful, and it is skill which is employed if you murder a man treacherously. Might and skill are in this case equally right. In a duel, for instance, both the one and the other come into play, for a feint is only another name for treachery. If I consider myself morally justified in taking a man's life, it is stupid of me to fry first of all whether he can shoot or fence better than I, as, if he can, he will not only have renged me, but have taken my life into the bargain. It is Rousseau's opinion that the proper way to avenge an insult is, not to fight a duel with your aggressor, but to assassinate him, an opinion, however, which he is cautious enough only to barely indicate in a mysterious note to one of the books of his Emile. This shows the philosopher so completely under the influence of the medieval superstition of knightly honor that he considers it justifiable to murder a man who accuses you of lying, whilst he must have known that every man, and himself especially, has deserved to have the lie given him times without number. The prejudice which justifies the killing of your adversary, so long as it is done in an open contest and with equal weapons, obviously looks upon might as really right, and a duel as the interference of God. The Italian who, in a fit of rage, falls upon his aggressor wherever he finds him, and dispatches him without any ceremony, acts, at any rate, consistently and naturally. He may be cleverer, but he is not worse, than the duelist. If you say, I am justified in killing my adversary in a duel, because he is at the moment doing his best to kill me, I can reply that it is your challenge which has placed him under the necessity of defending himself, and that by mutually putting it on the ground of self-defense, the combatants are seeking a plausible pretext for committing murder. I should rather justify the deed by the legal maxim valenti non fit injuria, because the parties mutually agree to set their life upon the issue. This argument may, however, be rebutted by showing that the injured party is not injured volens, because it is this tyrannical principle of knightly honor, with its absurd code, which forcibly drags one at least of the combatants before a bloody inquisition. I have been rather prolix on the subject of knightly honor, but I had reason for being so, because the Augean stable of moral and intellectual enormity in this world can be cleaned out only with the besom of philosophy. There are two things which more than all else serve to make the social arrangements of modern life compare unfavorably with those of antiquity, by giving our age a gloomy, dark, and sinister aspect, from which antiquity, fresh, natural and, as it were, in the morning of life, is completely free. I mean modern honor and modern disease, par nobile fratrum, which have combined to poison all the relations of life, whether public or private. The second of this noble pair extends its influence much farther than at first appears to be the case, as being not merely a physical, but also a moral disease. From the time that poisoned arrows have been found in Cupid's quiver, an estranging, hostile, nay, devilish element has entered into the relations of men and women, like a sinister thread of fear and mistrust in the warp and woof of their intercourse, indirectly shaking the foundations of human fellowship, and so more or less affecting the whole tenor of existence. But it would be beside my present purpose to pursue the further an influence analogous to this, though working on other lines, is exerted by the principle of knightly honor, that solemn farce, unknown to the ancient world, which makes modern society stiff, gloomy, and timid, forcing us to keep the strictest watch on every word that falls. Nor is this all. The principle is a universal minotaur, and the goodly company of the sons of noble houses which it demands in yearly tribute, comes, not from one country alone, as of old, but from every land in Europe. It is high time to make a regular attack upon this foolish system, and this is what I am trying to do now. Would that these two monsters of the modern world might disappear before the end of the century. Let us hope that medicine may be able to find some means of preventing the one, and that, by clearing our ideals, philosophy may put an end to the other, for it is only by clearing our ideas that the evil can be eradicated. Governments have tried to do so by legislation, and failed. Still, if they are really concerned to stop the dueling system, and if the small success that has attended their efforts is really due only to their inability to cope with the evil, I do not mind proposing a law the success of which I am prepared to guarantee. It will involve no sanguinary measures, and can be put into operation recourse either to the scaffold or the ouse, or to imprisonment for life. It is a small homeopathic pilule, with no serious after effects. If any man send or accept a challenge, let the corporal take him before the guard-house, and there give him, in broad daylight, 12 strokes with a stick à la chinoise, a non-commissioned officer or a private to receive 6. If a duel has actually taken place, the usual criminal proceedings should be instituted. A person with knightly notions might, perhaps, object that, if such a punishment were carried out, a man of honor would possibly shoot himself, to which I should answer that it is better for a fool like that to shoot himself rather than other people. However, I know very well that governments are not really in earnest about putting down dueling. Civil officials, and much more so, officers in the army, except those in the highest positions, are paid most inadequately for the services they perform, and the deficiency is made up by honor, which is represented by titles and orders, and, in general, by the system of rank and distinction. The duel is, so to speak, a very serviceable extra horse for people of rank, so they are trained in the knowledge of it at the universities. The accidents which happen to those who use it make up in blood for the deficiency of the pay. Just to complete the discussion, let me here mention the subject of national honor. It is the honor of a nation as a unit in the aggregate of nations. And as there is no court to appeal to but the court of force, and as every nation must be prepared to defend its own interests, the honor of a nation consists in establishing the opinion, not only that it may be trusted, its credit, but also that it is to be feared. An attack upon its rights must never be allowed to pass unheeded. It is a combination of civic and knightly honor. Section 5. Fame. Under the heading of place in the estimation of the world we have put fame, and this we must now proceed to consider. Fame and honor are Huvins, and Fivins, too, like Castor and Pollux, of whom the one was mortal and the other was not. Fame is the undying brother of ephemeral honor. I speak, of course, of the highest kind of fame, that is, of fame in the true and genuine sense of the word, for, to be sure, there are many sorts of fame, some of which last but a day. Honor is concerned merely with such qualities as everyone may be expected to show under similar circumstances, fame only of those which cannot be required of any man. Honor is of qualities which everyone has a right to attribute to himself, fame only of those which should be left to others to attribute. Our honor extends as far as people have knowledge of us, fame runs in advance, and makes us known wherever it finds its way. Everyone can make a claim to honor, very few to fame, as being attainable only in virtue of extraordinary achievements. These achievements may be of two kinds, either actions, or works, and so to fame there are two paths open. On the path of actions, a great heart is the chief recommendation, on that of works, a great head. Each of the two paths has its own peculiar advantages and detriments, and the chief difference between them is that actions are fleeting, while works remain. The influence of an action, be it never so noble, can last but a short time, but a work of genius is a living influence, beneficial and ennobling throughout the ages. All that can remain of actions is a memory, and that becomes weak and disfigured by time, a matter of indifference to us, until at last it is extinguished altogether, unless, indeed, history takes it up, and presents it, fossilized, to posterity. Works are immortal in themselves, and once committed to writing, may live forever. Of Alexander the Great we have but the name and the record, but Plato and Aristotle, Homer and Horace are alive, and as directly at work today as they were in their own lifetime. The Vedas, and their Upanishads, are still with us, but of all contemporaneous actions not a trace has come down to us. Another disadvantage under which actions labor is that they depend upon chance for the possibility of coming into existence, and hence, the fame they win does not flow entirely from their intrinsic value, but also from the circumstances which happened to lend them importance and luster. Again, the fame of actions, if, as in war, they are purely personal, depends upon the testimony of fewer witnesses, and these are not always present, and even if present, are not always just or unbiased observers. This disadvantage, however, is counterbalanced by the fact that actions have the advantage of being of a practical character, and, therefore, within the range of general human intelligence, so that once the facts have been correctly reported, justice is immediately done, unless, indeed, the motive underlying the action is not at first properly understood or appreciated. No action can be really understood apart from the motive which prompted it. It is just the contrary with works. Their inception does not depend upon chance, but wholly and entirely upon their author, and whoever they are in and for themselves, that they remain as long as they live. Further, there is a difficulty in properly judging them, which becomes all the harder, the higher their character. Often there are no persons competent to understand the work, and often no unbiased or honest critics. Their fame, however, does not depend upon one judge only, they can enter an appeal to another. In the case of actions, as I have said, it is only their memory which comes down to posterity, and then only in the traditional form, but works are handed down themselves, and, except when parts of them have been lost, in the form in which they first appeared. In this case there is no for any disfigurement of the facts, and any circumstance which may have prejudiced them in their origin, fall away with the lapse of time. Nay, it is often only after the lapse of time that the persons really competent to judge them appear, exceptional critics sitting in judgment on exceptional works, and giving their weighty verdicts in succession. These collectively form a perfectly just appreciation, and though there are cases where it has taken some hundreds of years to form it, no further lapse of time is able to reverse the verdict, so secure and inevitable is the fame of a great work. Va whether authors ever live to see the dawn of their fame depends upon the chance of circumstance, and the higher and more important their works are, the less likelihood there is of their doing so. That was an incomparable fine saying of Seneca's, that fame follows merit as surely as the body casts a shadow, sometimes falling in front, and sometimes behind. And he goes on to remark that though the envy of contemporaries be shown by universal silence, there will come those who will judge without enmity or favor. From this remark it is manifest that even in Seneca's age there were rascals who understood the art of suppressing merit by maliciously ignoring its existence, and of concealing work from the public in order to favor the bad. It is an art well understood in our day, too, manifesting itself, both then and now, in an envious conspiracy of silence. As a general rule, the longer a man's fame is likely to last, the later it will be in coming, for all excellent products require time for their development. The fame which lasts to posterity is like an oak, of very slow growth, and that which endures but a little while, like plants which spring up in a year and then die, whilst false fame is like a fungus, shooting up in a night and perishing as soon. And why? For this reason, the more a man belongs to posterity, in other words, to humanity in general, the more of an alien he is to his contemporaries, since his work is not meant for them as such, but only for them in so far as they form part of mankind at large. There is none of that familiar local color about his productions which would appeal to them, and so what he does, fails of recognition because it is strange. People are more likely to appreciate the man who serves the circumstances of his own brief hour, or the temper of the moment, belonging to it, living and dying with it. The general history of art and literature shows that the highest achievements of the human mind are, as a rule, not favorably received at first, but remain in obscurity until they win notice from intelligence of a high order, by whose influence they are brought into a position which they then maintain, in virtue of the authority thus given them. If the reason of this should be asked, it will be found that ultimately, a man can really understand and appreciate those things only which are of like nature with himself. The dull person will like what is dull, and the common person what is common. A man whose ideas are mixed will be attracted by confusion of thought, and folly will appeal to him who has no brains at all. But best of all, a man will like his own works, as being of a character thoroughly at one with himself. This is a truth as old as Epicharmus of fabulous memory Greek. Thomastinutin esti me tothauto legain kal andani not was anonymous kal dokian kalos pethokina kal gar hoku on kuni kalaton imen faintai koi bus boi onos dono kalistin estin, us dut. The sense of this passage, for it should not be lost, is that we should not be surprised if people are pleased with themselves, and fancy that they are in good case, for to a dog the best thing in the world is a dog, to an ox, to an ass, and to a sow the strongest arm is unavailing to give impetus to a featherweight, for, instead of speeding on its way and hitting its mark with effect, it will soon fall to the ground, having expended what little energy was given to it, and possessing no mass of its own to be the vehicle of momentum. So it is with great and noble thoughts, nay, with the very masterpieces of genius, when there are none but little, weak, and perverse minds to appreciate them, a fact which has been deplored by a chorus of the wise in all ages. Jesus, the son of Sirach, for instance, declares that he that telleth a tale to a fool speaketh to one in slumber. When he hath told his tale, he will say, "Six hat is the matter?" And Hamlet says, "A knavish speech sleeps in a fool's ear." And Goethe is of the same opinion, that a dull ear mocks at the wisest word. Das glücklich Saint Wort es Word verhint, wenn der Horror ein Skifar ist, and again, that we should not be discouraged if people are stupid, for you can make no rings if you throw your stone into a marsh. Du I wirkest nicht, als bleibt so stumpf, sei guter Dinge. Der Stein in Sumpf macht kein Ring. Lichtenberg asks, wie man a head and a book come into collision, and one sounds hollow, is it always the book? And in another place, works like this are as a mirror, if an ass looks in, you cannot expect an apostle to look out. We should do well to remember old Gellert's fine and touching lament, that the best gifts of all find the fewest admirers, and that most men mistake the bad for the good, a daily evil that nothing can prevent, like a plague which no remedy can cure. There is but one thing to be done, though how difficult. The foolish must become wise, and that they can never be. The value of life they never know, they see with the outer eye but never with the mind, and praise the trivial because the good is strange to them. Ni kennen sie den Worth der Dinge, ihr Ausschliess, nicht ihr Verstand, sie loben wig das Geringe weil sie das Gut neigekennt to the intellectual incapacity which, as Goethe says, fails to recognize and appreciate the good which exists, must be added something which comes into play everywhere, the moral baseness of mankind, here taking the form of envy. The new fame that a man wins raises him afresh over the heads of his fellows, who are thus degraded in proportion. All conspicuous merit is obtained at the cost of those who possess none, or, as Goethe has it in the Westestlicher Divan, another's praise is one's own depreciation when wir anderen ergeben müssen wir uns selbst enttadeln. We see, then, how it is that, whatever be the form which excellence takes, mediocrity, the common lot of by far the greatest number, is leagued against it in a conspiracy to resist, and if possible, to suppress it. The password of this league is Bas el-Emirite. Nay more, those who have done something themselves, and enjoy a certain amount of fame, do not care about the appearance of a new reputation, because its success is apt to throw theirs into the shade. Hence, Goethe declares that if we had to depend for our life upon the favor of others, we should never have lived at all. From their desire to appear important themselves, people gladly ignore our very existence. Hat ich gesodert sie werden, bis man mir's Leben geognut, ich wär noch nicht aufwerden, wie ihr konnt, wenn ihr set, wie sie sich geberden, die, etwas sie uskinen, mich gem mochten vernienen. Honor, on the contrary, generally meets with fair appreciation, and is not exposed to the onslaught of envy. Nay, every man is credited with the possession of it until the contrary is proved. But fame has to be won in despite of envy, and the tribunal which awards the laurel is composed of judges biased against the applicant from the very first. Honor is something which we are able and ready to share with everyone. Fame suffers encroachment and is rendered more unattainable in proportion as more people come by it. Further, the difficulty of winning fame by any given work stands in reverse ratio to the number of people who are likely to read it, and hence it is so much harder to become famous as the author of a learned work than as a writer who aspires only to amuse. It is hardest of all in the case of philosophical works, because the result at which they aim is rather vague, and, at the same time, useless from a material point of view. They appeal chiefly to readers who are working on the same lines themselves. It is clear, then, from what I have said as to the difficulty of winning fame, that those who labor, not out of love for their subject, nor from pleasure in pursuing it, but under the stimulus of ambition, rarely or never leave mankind a legacy of immortal works. The man who seeks to do what is good and genuine, must avoid what is bad, and be ready to defy the opinions of the mob, nay, even to despise it and its misleaders. Hence the truth of the remark, especially insisted upon by Osorius de Gloria, that fame shuns those who seek it, and seeks those who shun it, for the one adapt themselves to the taste of their contemporaries, and the others work in defiance of it. But, difficult though it be to acquire fame, it is an easy thing to keep when once acquired. Here, again, fame is in direct opposition to honor, with which everyone is presumably to be accredited. Honor has not to be won, it must only not be lost. But there lies the difficulty. For by a single unworthy action, it is gone irretrievably. But fame, in the proper sense of the word, can never disappear, for the action or work by which it was acquired can never be undone, and fame attaches to its author, even though he does nothing to deserve it anew. The fame which vanishes, or is outlived, proves itself thereby to be spurious, in other words, unmerited, and due to a momentary overestimate of a man's work, not to speak of the kind of fame which Hegel enjoyed, and which Lichtenberg describes as trumpeted forth by a clique of admiring undergraduates, the resounding echo of empty heads, such a fame as will make posterity smile when it lights upon a grotesque architecture of words, a fine nest with the birds long ago flown. It will knock at the door of this decayed structure of conventionalities and find it utterly empty. Not even a trace of thought there to invite the passerby. The truth is that fame means nothing but what a man is in comparison with others. It is essentially relative in character, and therefore only indirectly valuable, for it vanishes the moment other people become what the famous man is. Absolute value can be predicated only of what a man possesses under any and all circumstances, here, what a man is and in himself. It is the possession of a great heart or a great head, and not the mere fame of it, which is worth having, and conducive to happiness. Not fame, but that which deserves to be famous, is what a man should hold in esteem. This is, as it were, the true underlying substance, and fame is only an accident, affecting its subject chiefly as a kind of external symptom, which serves to confirm his own opinion of himself. Light is not visible unless it meets with something to reflect it, and talent is sure of itself only when its fame is noised abroad. But fame is not a certain symptom of merit, because you can have the one without the other, or, as Lessing nicely puts it, some people obtain fame, and others deserve it. It would be a miserable existence which should make its value or want of value depend upon what other people think, but such would be the life of a hero or a genius if its worth consisted in fame, that is, in the applause of the world. Every man lives and exists on his own account, and, therefore, mainly in and for himself, and what he is and the whole manner of his being concern himself more than anyone else, so if he is not worth much in this respect, he cannot be worth much otherwise. The idea which other people form of his existence is something secondary, derivative, exposed to all the chances of fate, and in the end affecting him but very indirectly. Besides, other people's heads are a wretched place to be the home of a man's true happiness, a fanciful happiness perhaps, but not a real one. And what a mixed company inhabits the temple of universal fame! Generals, ministers, charlatans, jugglers, dancers, singers, millionaires, and Jews. It is a temple in which more sincere recognition, more genuine esteem, is given to the several excellencies of such folk, than to superiority of mind, even of a high order, which obtains from the great majority only a verbal acknowledgment. From the point of view of human happiness, fame is, surely, nothing but a very rare and delicate morsel for the appetite that feeds on pride and vanity, an appetite which, however carefully concealed, exists to an immoderate degree in every man, and is, perhaps strongest of all in those who set their hearts on becoming famous at any cost. Such people generally have to wait some time in uncertainty as to their own value, before the opportunity comes which will put it to the proof and let other people see what they are made of, but until then, they feel as if they were suffering secret injustice. But, as I explained at the beginning of this chapter, an unreasonable value is set upon other people's opinion, and one quite disproportionate to its real worth. Hobbes has some strong remarks on this subject, and no doubt he is quite right. Mental pleasure, he writes, and ecstasy of any kind, arise when, on comparing ourselves with others, we come to the conclusion that we may think well of ourselves. So we can easily understand the great value which is always attached to fame, as worth any sacrifices if there is the slightest hope of attaining it. Fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise, that hath infirmity of noble mind, to scorn delights and live laborious days, and again, how hard it is to climb the heights where fame's proud temple shines afar. We can thus understand how it is that the vainest people in the world are always talking about la gloire, with the most implicit faith in it as a stimulus to great actions and great works. But there can be no doubt that fame is something in its character, a mere echo or reflection as it were, a shadow or symptom of merit, and, in any case, what excites admiration must be of more value than the admiration itself. The truth is that a man is made happy, not by fame, but by that which brings him fame, by his merits, or to speak more correctly, by the disposition and capacity from which his merits proceed, whether they be moral or intellectual. The best side of a man's nature must of necessity be more important for him than for anyone else. The reflection of it, the opinion which exists in the heads of others, is a matter that can affect him only in a very subordinate degree. He who deserves fame without getting it possesses by far the more important element of happiness, which should console him for the loss of the other. It is not that a man is thought to be great by masses of incompetent and often infatuated people, but that he really is great, which should move us to envy his position, and his happiness lies, not in the fact that posterity will hear of him, but that he is the creator of thoughts worthy to be treasured up and studied for hundreds of years. Besides, if a man has done this, he possesses something which cannot be wrested from him, and, unlike fame, it is a possession dependent entirely upon himself. If admiration were his chief aim, there would be nothing in him to admire. This is just what happens in the case of false, that is, unmerited, fame, for its recipient lives upon it without actually possessing the solid substratum of which fame is the outward and visible sign. False fame must often put its possessor out of conceit with himself, for the time may come when, in spite of the illusions born of self-love, he will feel giddy on the heights which he was never meant to climb, or look upon himself as spurious coin, and in the anguish of threatened discovery and well-merited degradation, he will read the sentence of posterity on the foreheads of the wise like a man who owes his property to a forged will. The truest fame, the fame that comes after death, is never heard of by its recipient, and yet he is called a happy man. His happiness lay both in the possession of those great qualities which won him fame, and in the opportunity that was granted him of developing them. The leisure he had to act as he pleased, to dedicate himself to his favorite pursuits. It is only work done from the heart that ever gains the laurel. Greatness of soul, or wealth of intellect, is what makes a man happy. Intellect, such as, when stamped on its productions, will receive the admiration of centuries to come, thoughts which make him happy at that time, and will in their turn be a source of study and delight to the noblest minds of the most remote posterity. The value of posthumous fame lies in deserving it, and this is its own reward. Va Heather works destined to fame attain it in the lifetime of their author is a chance affair, of no very great importance. For the average man has no critical power of his own, and is absolutely incapable of appreciating the difficulty of a great work. People are always swayed by authority, and where fame is widespread, it means that 99 out of 100 take it on faith alone. If a man is famed far and wide in his own lifetime, he will, if he is wise, not set too much value upon it, because it is no more than the echo of a few voices, which the chance of a day has touched in his favor. Would a musician feel flattered by the loud applause of an audience if he knew that they were nearly all deaf, and that, to conceal their infirmity, they set to work to clap vigorously as ever saw one or two persons applauding? And what would he say if he got to know that those one or two persons had often taken bribes to secure the loudest applause for the poorest player? It is easy to say why contemporary praise so seldom develops into posthumous fame. D. Imbert, in an extremely fine description of the temple of literary fame, remarks that the sanctuary of the temple is inhabited by the great dead, who during their life had no place there, and by a very few living persons, who are nearly all ejected on their death. Let me remark, in passing, that to erect a monument to a man in his lifetime is as much as declaring that posterity is not to be trusted in its judgment of him. If a man does happen to see his own true fame, it can very rarely be before he is old, though there have been artists and musicians who have been exceptions to this rule, but very few philosophers. This is confirmed by the portraits of people celebrated by their works, for most of them are taken only after their subjects have attained celebrity, generally depicting them as old and gray, more especially if philosophy has been the work of their lives. From the eudaimonistic standpoint, this is a very proper arrangement, as fame and youth are too much for a mortal at one and the same time. Life is such a poor business that the strictest economy must be exercised in its good things. Youth has enough and to spare in itself, and must rest content with what it has. But when the delights and joys of life fall away in old age, as the leaves from a tree in autumn, fame buds forth opportunely, like a plant that is green in winter. Fame is, as it were, the fruit that must grow all the summer before it can be enjoyed at Yule. There is no greater consolation in age than the feeling of having put the whole force of one's youth into works which still remain young. Finally, let us examine a little more closely the kinds of fame which attach to various intellectual pursuits, for it is with fame of this sort that my remarks are more immediately concerned. I think it may be said broadly that the intellectual superiority it denotes consists in forming theories, that is, new combinations of certain facts. These facts may be of very different kinds, but the better they are known, and the more they come within everyday experience, the greater and wider will be the fame which is to be won by theorizing about them. For instance, if the facts in question are numbers or lines or special branches of science, such as physics, zoology, botany, anatomy, or corrupt passages in ancient authors, or undecipherable inscriptions, written, it may be, in some unknown alphabet, or obscure points in history, the kind of fame that may be obtained by correctly manipulating such facts will not extend much. Those who make a study of them, a small number of persons, most of whom live retired lives and are envious of others who become famous in their special branch of knowledge. But if the facts be such as are known to everyone, for example, the fundamental characteristics of the human mind or the human heart, which are shared by all alike, or the great physical agencies which are constantly in operation before our eyes, or the general course of natural laws, the kind of fame which is to be won by spreading the light of a new and manifestly true theory in regard to them, is such as in time will extend almost all over the civilized world, for if the facts be such as everyone can grasp, the theory also will be generally intelligible. But the extent of the fame will depend upon the difficulties overcome, and the more generally known the facts are, the harder it will be to form a theory that shall be both new and true, because a great many heads will have been occupied with them, and there will be little or no possibility of saying anything that has not been said before. On the other hand, facts which are not accessible to everybody, and can be got at only after much difficulty and labor, nearly always admit of new combinations and theories, so that, if sound understanding and judgment are brought to bear upon them, qualities which do not involve very high intellectual power, a man may easily be so fortunate as to light upon some new theory in regard to them which shall be also true. But fame won on such paths does not extend much beyond those who possess a knowledge of the facts in question. To solve problems of this sort requires, no doubt, a great ideal of study and labor, if only to get at the facts. Whilst on the path where the greatest and most widespread fame is to be won, the facts may be grasped without any labor at all. But just in proportion as less labor is necessary, more talent or genius is required, and between such qualities and the drudgery of research no comparison is possible, in respect either of their intrinsic value, or of the estimation in which they are held. And so people who feel that they possess solid intellectual capacity and a sound judgment, and yet cannot claim the highest mental powers, should not be afraid of laborious study, for by its aid they may work themselves above the great mob of humanity who have the facts constantly before their eyes, and reach those secluded spots which are accessible to learned toil. For this is a sphere where there are infinitely fewer rivals, and a man of only moderate capacity may soon find an opportunity of proclaiming a theory which shall be both new and true. Nay, the merit of his discovery will partly rest upon the difficulty of coming at the facts. But applause from one's fellow students, who are the only persons with a knowledge of the sounds very faint to the far-off multitude. And if we follow up this sort of fame far enough, we shall at last come to a point where facts very difficult to get at are in themselves sufficient to lay a foundation of fame, without any necessity for forming a theory. Travels, for instance, in remote and little-known countries, which make a man famous by what he has seen, not by what he has thought. The great advantage of this kind of fame is that to relate what one has seen, is much easier than to impart one's thoughts, and people are apt to understand descriptions better than ideas, reading the one more readily than the other, for, as Asmus says, when one goes forth a-voyaging he has a tale to tell. And yet for all that, a personal acquaintance with celebrated travelers often remind us of a line from Horace: new scenes do not always mean new ideas, coelum non animum mutant qui transmercurunt. But if a man finds himself in possession of great mental faculties, such as alone should venture on the solution of the hardest of all problems, those which concern nature as a whole and humanity in its widest range, he will do well to extend his view equally in all directions, without ever straying too far amid the intricacies of various bypaths, or invading regions little known, in other words, without occupying himself special branches of knowledge, to say nothing of their petty details. There is no necessity for him to seek out subjects difficult of access, in order to escape a crowd of rivals. The common objects of life will give him material for new theories at once serious and true, and the service he renders will be appreciated by all those, and they form a great part of mankind who know the facts of which he treats. And had a vast distinction there is between students of physics, chemistry, anatomy, mineralogy, zoology, philology, history, and the men who deal with the great facts of human life, the poet and the philosopher.